What's the old saying? That once drones are outlawed, only outlaws will have drones? Well, color me an outlaw then. And I know there are millions that think the same way that will not comply. Good evening. So we have a very important day coming up, and I say we collectively in the drone and FPV community. Oral arguments have been scheduled for December 15th of 2021 this year in the case of Racedayquads versus the FAA regarding RemoteID. RemoteID was thrust upon us, and the final rule was established by the FAA on January 15th of 2021, and it looks nothing like the proposed rule from the NPRM. In fact, in my opinion, it's much more draconian. So my views on this have evolved. I was all for it until kind of read the fine print, and my eyes were opened up by this lawsuit. So first off, I want to give a big thank you to Tyler Brennan of Racedayquads and his team of top-notch attorneys, including the esteemed Jonathan Rupprecht, one of the top aviation drone attorneys in the country, for filing this lawsuit on our behalf. And it is on our behalf. And this lawsuit matters not only to us in the drone community, but it's also important to non-drone folks, because if this rule holds, get ready for other agencies to track you in numerous ways. So we're going to kind of go over some of the documents here. I don't want to get too technical, and I'm not an attorney, but I do understand the legal arguments, certainly. Many arguments were raised, specifically constitutional arguments, statutory arguments, and jurisdictional arguments. Let me try that again. Jurisdictional arguments were made against the current form of RemoteID as well. To kind of sum those up, just a little bit here. The constitutional argument is the rule violates the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable searches. And there are also statutory violations regarding this. Let me go ahead and change the screen here. And then there are jurisdictional arguments against this, as well as the FAA failed to consider relevant information, which would be a statutory argument, I guess. Of over 55,000 comments were received during the comment period. By law, the FAA is to respond to relevant concerns and arguments, and they did no such thing. Definition of navigational airspace, for instance, was never clarified by the FAA. I personally don't think they anticipated the amount of pushback that they received during the comment period and didn't know what to do with it. And then a jurisdictional argument was made of the FAA cannot regulate non-navigable airspace. Their original mandate from Congress was to oversee the navigable airspace of the United States, and all of a sudden this morphed into all airspace. From the blade of grass on up. So let's kind of go over some of these arguments here that were made in the initial brief. Bring my screen up here, and excuse my heater in the back. I'll try and get this sound off. I am up here in the North Woods of Wisconsin, and it, of course, is cold out here. So, summary of the argument that was originally made in the brief that was filed on, court case was filed on October 4th of 2021 of this year. The FAA response was filed on October 10th. October 4th of this year. And the Racedayquads reply brief was filed on November 2nd of this year. And once again, the oral argument before the district court judge in D.C., federal district court judge, is anticipated to occur on December 15th of this year. 14 days from now, we may find out or get some inkling as to what will happen. 27 separate arguments were made against this rule. The judge only needs to pick one, and the whole thing comes crashing down. So, reading from the initial filing, the summary of the argument, the FAA flagrantly disregarded mandates from Congress, ignored material comments, including failure to provide any actual safety justification or authority for the rulemaking, implemented changes not logically flowing from the NPRM, thereby circumventing required notice and comment, and trampled Fourth Amendment rights. Far from being a product of reasoned decision-making conducted with transparency and public input, this rulemaking was a sham. I concur. Although Congress instructed FAA to develop standards for remote ID in consultation with RTCA and NIST, there is no evidence that this was done. The FAA has steadfastly maintained that the remote ID cohort, a group of companies formed during the NPRM's comment period to assist FAA with developing technology requirements for remote ID, was unrelated to the remote ID rulemaking. So the FAA says. Accordingly, all documents exchanged, meetings held, and information shared between FAA and the cohort remained secret, and the public's attempts to comment or ask questions were denied. A flagrant violation of the notice and comment requirements of the APA and DOT rulemaking regulations, or an arbitrary and capricious failure to consider extremely relevant information. It also renders justification for changes in the final rule implausible. FAA has presented this rule as necessary to ensure safety and efficiency in the national airspace, claiming that remote ID would be used for things such as detect and avoid in traffic management. A full consideration of all the relevant information, however, shows otherwise. FAA plainly states the purpose of remote ID is supplying necessary data to security partners, not air traffic. This is not about air traffic. And indicates most everything will go to law enforcement if requested. FAA needs to call this rule what it is, a GPS tracking and identification rulemaking. Properly disclose all of the off-record communications, evidence the full nature and intent of the rule, and allow public comment and participation in light of this knowledge, and adequately respond to material public comments and concerns as required for a proper notice and comment rulemaking under the Administration Procedure Act, the APA. As written, and I concur with this strongly, as written, the rule blatantly violates Fourth Amendment guarantees and flies in the face of Supreme Court precedents. In addition to ignoring constitutional protections, FAA disregarded significant public comments and concerns. Among other things, Commenters challenged the FAA's statutory and constitutional authority to regulate non-commercial drones and non-navigable airspace, pointed out inaccurate data relied upon in the regulatory analysis, presented reasonable alternatives to the exclusively broad and burdensome requirements, and questioned the alleged safety justifications of the rule. FAA did not respond adequately or at all. The FAA also implemented multiple changes that were not presented for public comment and review because they were not a logical outgrowth of the NPRM. The plethora of procedural errors, constitutional violation, inexcusable subversion maneuvers to conceal the true security focus of the alleged safety rulemaking, thus preventing meaningful public participation, and the failure to respond to or address the material comments received, render the rule as promulgated void. And I certainly agree with that. I think the entire remote ID rule that they proposed is coming down from the Department of Homeland Security. It is an outgrowth of way back 2001 when they passed the Patriot Act. Basically mass surveillance on the public. And you see that everywhere. Now, we'll kind of get into the counter arguments from the FAA response, which was again filed on October 4th of this year. So let me pull that up here. Got to get the cheaters out. Actually, those ones are dirty. There we go. All right. So the FAA response, in my opinion, was sloppy and juvenile. The FAA was downright deceptive. I think this is page 18. So the FAA has ascertained that the rule is a license plate. Basically, remote ID is a license plate in the sky. That assertion has been made time and time again by the FAA in print, on YouTube, in webinars, etc. They can repeat it all they want, but it does not make it so. It is a GPS tracking device meant to track not only the drone, but also the location of the operator of the drone, regardless of the airspace, regardless of whether it's in your backyard, under the tree cover. That is what the FAA is attempting to do with this remote ID. They also presented some blatant falsehoods, and let me go up to page 3 here, regarding, again, what they perceive to be the current rules with manned aircraft, that all manned aircraft must that is actually in the reply brief. Okay, we'll get back to that. But basically, that all manned aircraft have to provide their location information when traveling in the national airspace. This is simply not true. Class G airspace, there are no reporting requirements for any manned aircraft. Manned aircraft do not have to broadcast their position. whether it be through electronic means, ADS-B, have a transponder going, or broadcast their intentions over the radio in so many areas of this country, Class G airspace. We'll get into that a little further. Again, so the FAA's argument basically was, that's on page 18, was, well, you know, this doesn't violate the Fourth Amendment, but it might. And if it does, even if the rules requirements amounted to a search under the Fourth Amendment, any such search would not be subject to the Fourth Amendment's warrant requirement because the rule is justified by special needs associated with public safety and national security. So anytime any agency, and I say any agency, wants to circumvent the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which I believe we still are under, they can bend the rules, they can throw out the amendments based on special needs associated with public safety and national security. That sentence right there tells me that this is coming down from the Department of Homeland Security. They can do whatever they want in the name of security. And I'm sorry, it's just wrong. So again, the FAA, to sum it up, their response was sloppy and juvenile. They've been downright deceptive. They claim it's a license plate in the sky. It is not a license plate in the sky. The license plate is actually the registration sticker that you need to put on the quad drone. And again, they misrepresent that. They state that all airplanes must provide the location information when traveling in the national airspace. It's simply not true. It's false. So then we get into the reply brief, which was submitted by Racedayquads on November 2nd in response to the FAA's response, because this is how lawsuits work. The initial lawsuit, Racedayquads filed that. FAA was given a chance to respond, and Racedayquads responded to the FAA response, and a wonderful, succinct response by Racedayquads it was. So if we go into the airspace portion of it, and that is on page 3 of this document, they make a valid argument. So let's just go ahead and read the summary of the argument. The FAA and amicus attempt to paint a picture of airspace that does not exist. Precedent applicable to aircraft flying at least 500 feet in the sky, an area subject to extensive regulation, does not negate privacy interests in airspace low to the ground in private backyards, an area specifically reserved for landowner control. Similarly, cases finding no Fourth Amendment concerns with installing a tracking device on property not owned by the individual do not justify installation of tracking devices on privately owned drones and controllers. RemoteID provides otherwise impossible surveillance without any of the physiological, economic, or time restraints inherent in the methods of surveillance cited by the FAA. So the FAA, in their reply brief, basically came up with a whole lot of different arguments of why this is not a Fourth Amendment violation, because your cell phone's tracked and things are tracked, and you might be tracked by cameras when you're driving down the road, etc., etc. So that's why the Racedayquads responded in this manner. Precedents dictates finding remote ID implements a warrantless search. FAA has not established a special needs exception. The final rule cannot survive constitutional scrutiny, nor can the rule withstand arbitrary and capricious review. None of the FAA's proffered explanations alter the fact that FAA considered ex parte communications and withheld key information. That goes back to the meetings that they were having with third parties during the comment period, because they're just in such a hurry to get this out there. The FAA still has not shown it properly considered or responded to material comments or satisfied the statutory requirement to consult with specific entities. Nothing argued by the respondent is sufficient to overcome the plethora of problems with this rulemaking. Petitioner does not dispute that Congress ordered FAA to adopt regulations or guidance on remote ID, or that a properly promulgated remote ID rule could serve as a beneficial stepping stone to pave the way for extended capabilities of drones. And I agree with that. UTM, unmanned traffic management. This is not unmanned traffic management. But as everyone acknowledges, this rulemaking is a crucial step in the trajectory of drone operations. It is vitally important it be done properly, with openness, transparency, and full public participation, as well as respect for constitutional guarantees. FAA cannot trample the rights of private individuals, withhold relevant and relied upon information for public scrutiny and comment, fail to address meaningful comments and concerns, or ignore statutory prerequisites to rulemaking under the guise of safety and security as a matter of expediency. No matter how necessary some form of regulation or guidance to govern drone operations may be, the FAA must be held accountable to the requirements of the Administrative Procedures Act and the United States Constitution. They cannot just arbitrarily throw those rules out and throw the constitutional arguments out in the name of safety and security. So inaccuracies, this is where we actually get into the specific arguments. And this is really important. I'm going to link all these documents in the description. And I'm also going to link in the description how you can help this lawsuit and defray some of the costs. I will also link in the description some of the interviews that have taken place with Tyler Brennan and Jonathan Rupprecht regarding this lawsuit. And then also a video on XJet's response to the FAA's continued assertions that this is just a license plate in the sky. It is not a license plate in the sky. Let's make that clear. So back to this reply brief. Inaccuracies. It is imperative to correct FAA's false claim that all airplanes must provide their location information while traveling in the national airspace. There are thousands of airports where pilots do not need to use a two-way radio, a transponder, or an automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, which is ADS-B, transmitter to transmit location information. Generally, only Class B, C, and D airports have equipment requirements. This is a fact. Regulations permit flying in Class G airspace without a transponder or ADS-B, without providing any location data. In South Florida, for example, approximately 73% of the airspace has no requirement to reveal identification or location below 700 feet. So why should a drone have to do that? Valid question. Furthermore, many general aviation aircraft utilize a mode allowing air traffic control to track their aircraft without identifying it. It's called a transponder. It says ADSB. Transponder, you would be able to identify the by the tail number. RemoteID does not have an equivalent option. For FAA to suggest this rule extends existing requirements for airplanes to drones is misleading and untrue. Fact. That is a fact. Again, the FAA made the argument that RemoteID does not violate the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable searches, but it does. The reasonable expectation of privacy. FAA's arguments against a reasonable expectation of privacy are outdated and ineffective to contradict the clearly articulated basis of privacy set forth in petitioner's opening brief. Number one, special privacy considerations for aircraft in the sky do not apply to drones low to the ground. FAA claims there is no reasonable expectation of privacy in the movement of aircraft in the sky while citing non-binding cases, which were all adjudicated before the digital age. The meanings of aircraft and sky in the 1970s and 1980s were very different from the aircraft and airspace at issue in this rule. The cases relied upon by the FAA and by amicus apply to manned aircraft regulatory required to fly higher than 500 feet above the ground in navigable airspace. This prescribed minimum safe altitudes for aircraft except when necessary for takeoff and landing at 500 feet or 1,000 feet above the surface. These regulations date back to 1941. Drones, in contrast, are required to almost always fly below 400 feet and often do so low to the ground on private property, including with the curtilage of the operator's home. Privacy considerations for large airplanes that can be seen miles away flying in airspace that is indisputably navigable and thus subject to extensive FAA regulation are far different from the privacy considerations at issue for small drones flown close to the ground and hidden from view by vegetation and fences in a private backyard. The quotes cited by FAA are from cases that did not anticipate the current state of aircraft or location of airspace at issue in this case. Yes, because in 1941, there were no drones. Nobody was out flying model aircraft. Nobody was out doing those things on private property. Similarly, FAA inaptly claims drone operators have limited privacy expectations because aviation safety is a highly regulated federal concern. While navigable airspace is subject to extensive regulation, as it should be, as are navigable waterways, there is no such justification for regulation of airspace in a private backyard. FAA's logic is akin to requiring a rowboat in a small private pond to broadcast its GPS coordinates along with the identity of the person rowing it. So think about that. Let me read that again. This is true if you place this in the context of what the FAA is trying to do. The FAA's logic is akin to requiring a rowboat in a small private pond to broadcast its GPS coordinates along with the identity of the person rowing it. There are limits to the reach of government control over the air outside our back doors, just as there are limits to government control over non-navigable water on private property. Amicus, however, argues the exact opposite position. Amicus exceeds FAA's arguments and claims property owners have no rights whatsoever in any adjacent airspace. Thus, there can be no privacy interests anywhere while operating a drone. In so arguing, Amicus asks the court to extend the logic of United States versus Cosby, which was a big case back in 1946, a case that limited the common law doctrine of land ownership extending to the periphery of the universe in recognition of federal control over navigable airspace as a public highway. But Cosby distinguished the highway in the sky from airspace low to the ground, specifically noting, quote, if the landowner is to have full enjoyment of the land, he must have exclusive control of the immediate reaches of the enveloping atmosphere. Otherwise, end quote, the court explained, buildings could not be erected, trees could not be planted, or even fences could not be run. Accordingly, as remains true today, the landowner owns at least as much of the space above the ground as he can occupy or use in conjunction with the land. So, if the FAA controls all airspace from the blade of grass up, if you want to erect a fence or you want to put up a building, you'll need a permit from the FAA as well as a permit from your local municipality or government. And that is simply unworkable. Amicus's argument implies homeowners have no right to prevent drones from flying through their backyard barbecues or kids' swing sets. Only FAA has any say in what happens within the airspace and private backyards. Surely, FAA does not have such unfettered control over all airspace at any height in any location. Even the DOT has explicitly disagreed with the FAA's interpretation of their authority. So, I don't need to get in this too much further. We're already at 32 minutes. But I'll leave this here for you to read. It's really good reading. Let's see if I have any comments on here. Look for that. No, I have no comments in here. I got one. And the inaccuracies. Okay. So we're good. Anyways, so how can we resolve this? What can be done? What are our options? And what about FPV? Why can't the FAA join, for example, New Zealand, for example, which has a carve-out for shielded operations? If you're below the treetop levels, there's no need to broadcast anything because it's non-navigable airspace for manned aircraft, generally. If you're below the tallest building structure, again, it's non-navigable airspace. Yeah, you might get a helicopter flying down the street, but there aren't any manned aircraft flying under the treetops, just are not. So New Zealand has this rule, shielded operations, that basically states that if you're below the treetops and you're below the tallest structure on the property, There's no need for that activity to be regulated. So again, to sum up, in Class G, generally no aircraft flies below 500 feet unless in the traffic pattern. And again, to sum up, aircraft in Class G space do not have to broadcast their position. And that's what this remote ID is asking us to do. Additionally, again, to stress the point, this is all driven from Homeland Security. And traffic separation and notification of other drones or aircraft in the vicinity can be done without the current iteration of remote ID. Me broadcasting my position is not going to tell that plane anything. They're not going to be able to see it. Only ADS-B they would be able to see. So what changes should they make? Well, couple of things. Maybe broadcast only when in controlled airspace. Class B, Class C, Class D. Leave Class G alone. Was a purpose for Class G. No archiving of any of this data. It cannot be stored anywhere. I personally have no problem broadcasting the drone's Latin launch, but certainly not the controller, not the location of the controller. That raises other issues, which you can find out about. And then, if they want that information, they need a warrant. There are other issues. Proposed GPS accuracy in this rule. They came out, I think it was last month, that said the GPS accuracy on remote ID must be within 15 feet vertically. Well, all the vendors are up in arms about this because right now in the current GPS market, that is not possible. 50 feet vertical accuracy is what's out there commercially right now. They don't even have remote ID requirements ready for the manufacturers to start this up. And so there are a whole lot of things. So I'm going to read here just a summation of what I responded to on one of the videos that appeared. And then we can close out on that. And again, I'm going to provide the links to the videos, relevant videos, and the GoFundMe page for Racedayquads in the description. But so I'm not against remote ID per se. As far as the Fourth Amendment, the government would need a warrant to put a GPS device on your vehicle. It's really a simple argument against it, in my opinion. Do we want to say that you can't use the federal highway system unless you have a tracking device on your vehicle? Your vehicle is not required to broadcast its location. Why should my UAV? Do we really want the government monitoring where and when you drive? Automatic tickets when you violate the speed limit? Private aircraft flying in Class G are not required to broadcast their location, nor are they required to file a flight plan even. When the FAA mentions remote ID, they say it is a license plate in the sky. In my opinion, it is not. My license plate is my registration that I have affixed to the UAV. Remote ID is effectively GPS monitoring of where and when you fly. If If I can fly in my backyard, why do I need to broadcast anything? Is it because the FAA owns the airspace? The FAA was originally given the task to govern and manage navigable airspace. My backyard under the tree covers is not navigable airspace for commercial purposes. I think they are spot on with the arguments, Racedayquads, I'm mentioning here, against the current iteration of RemoteID. In my opinion, we can find a middle ground and require RemoteID, UTM, for any airspace out of Class G. No different than squawking via a transponder for manned aircraft. I will note that I'm in favor of UTM for drones to integrate them into the airspace. So I'm not all rebel. I understand that we've got to integrate the drones in the national airspace. But RemoteID in its current iteration is not the way. This is tracking simple as that. This is not going to be integrated into the national airspace. The other thing is, here's one final point. How far you can see the broadcast of RemoteID. If I'm flying here in my backyard and I'm required to transmit RemoteID and I'm below my treetops, nobody is going to see that drone. Nobody is going to hear that drone. But if I have to broadcast that, that transmission at 1 watt will travel 1 mile. So they'll know he's out there flying in his backyard again. Oh my God. We better track him. What's the old saying? That once drones are outlawed, only outlaws will have drones? Well, color me an outlaw then. And I know there are millions that think the same way that will not comply. A lot of them in the FPV community, of which I'm a proud member now. And they just won't comply. And the rule will fall apart just based on non-compliance. So again, I understand the need to integrate drones in the national airspace under UTM, but this is not the way to do it. This is a tracking device by the Department of Homeland Security and nothing more than that. So anyways, may I please suggest that you visit the GoFundMe page for Racedayquads. The link is below. And if you don't want to donate directly to the cause of this lawsuit, please buy something from Racedayquads to show your support. Spread the word on this RemoteID and this lawsuit and the fact that oral arguments are right around the corner, December 15th. And you spread the word, even to your non-drone friends, because this has implications that could ripple through all the other agencies. And there will be GPS tracking devices on your license plates. They will see how many miles you drive. They will tax you accordingly by how many miles you drive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can see it happening, just the overreach from the federal government. So anyways, fly safe, stay safe. Remember, FPV is not a crime, nor is anything else I do. Thanks for watching. Take care. Have a great day. See you soon.